Everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Future Work World, episode 11, the podcast that explores the now, the next, and the could-bes of the world of work. I'm Barry Winkless, CSO of CPL Group and head of the Future Work Institute. Let's jump right in. Now, the trend that I'd like to speak about today is this whole idea around the employee value proposition. So we often hear about how important certain things are for people within their workplace. Obviously, compensation is one of those things, and perks and benefits are also equally important. From our work at the Future Work Institute, we have recognized 20 key factors that either attract us as workers or retain us and keep us interested in the workplace that we want to work in. And one of the things we're starting to see in some of the organizations we're working with and some of those leading organizations is this greater focus on thinking about employee value almost in the same way as you would think about a customer value proposition. So really designing it from the ground up, thinking about the important drivers that people will actually value. That will obviously be different depending on the mindsets, the generations, or the backgrounds of those particular individuals. But this idea of really holistically designing value propositions for employees that compel them to join our organizations and to stay within our organizations. I think from our own work, we do fully recognize that oftentimes organizations can't really tell their story in a very compelling way. They can't genuinely connect the dots in terms of what people can actually expect within the business that they work for. And oftentimes why people leave is a difference between what was highlighted to them when they started the organization versus the actual reality of the organization that they work in. There's often a gap between reality and expectations. So I think a big thing for us and to you leaders out there is to really think about what your employee value proposition actually is, to design it properly and to think of it exactly the same as a consumer or customer proposition in order to make it the most enticing thing it can be within your own constraints within your organization. So that's it, guys, for today on the trend. It's the employee value proposition. And now on to the interview segment of our show. I'm really happy to be interviewing Josephine Kelliher today, who's an incredible background as a producer, a curator, and most recently a leader of the Open Arts Initiative in Meta. And now on to the interview segment of our show. I'd like to introduce Josephine Kelliher. Josephine is both a producer, a director, a curator, and most recently the lead on the Open Arts Experiences Programme and Meta. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here.
Now, I have to say, I love your background. So instead of me trying to tell everybody about everything about your background, tell us your journey to here.
Great. Yeah, I love the idea of journeys and stories. It helps to kind of contextualize where you're at now. If I go on, just, you can divert me. I studied business, management science and marketing specifically. But my friendship base very quickly was around artists and art making and the things that they were interested in. And I kind of quickly saw how some of those skills that I had learned in a hard business course could really help a lot of artists with just kind of enabling them to kind of carry through on some of their ideas. Before I graduated, I started working as an artist agent, which was a bit precocious. And I opened Rubicon Gallery in 1990. And our focus at Rubicon Gallery was kind of career building for artists. Yeah. So many people think of a private gallery, they think of buying art or selling art. But actually we were focused on where the artist was and where they hoped to be. And we used our skills. I had a business partner at the time, Peter McKenna, who has gone on to be a scriptwriter for television and film, actually. Our focus was really listening to where the artists were coming from and trying to map them together with other people in the industry who could help them to get there. So networking with museums, curators, art critics, and helping to shape or edit the output of the artist studio to make it work for them better in an audience-facing context. Around 2012-13, I got the opportunity to work at Kilkenny Arts Festival, which was a really terrific baptism by fire. It's a huge festival, very long-standing, and I was a visual arts curator. And what that did for me, I think, is give me a different appreciation of audience. I was dealing with the public. These were people who didn't opt in necessarily to a specific artist's voice or presentation. They kind of came across it in a larger community context. So the idea of how you meet those people where they are, how you manage the experience so that there was a kind of openness. You didn't have any set of expectations of them, and they could come to you with no set of expectations. And I found that really thrilling, because the audience that I had dealt with previously were expert audience, really, museums, curators, academics, art critics, which wonderful people and a really enabling experience, but the broader public audience was intriguing. And that led me to my experience at Open Arts, which was really about art in the corporate context, something that I had obviously dealt with at Rubicon Gallery, but it was made entirely different in Open Arts. My task was sourcing and supporting an artist in residence program, so artists working inside the corporate environment, and commissioning and producing large-scale immersive art pieces that were embedded in the fabric of the building. I did that for about a year or two, and then became the manager of the program for EMEA and APAC, and it expanded. We were commissioning art, commissioning pieces of communication design, working externally with art partners. And I took on a challenge then, which is to make the art more relevant for the employees. So back to audience again, and communication and storytelling. Over time, I became the global lead of that part of the program, which was about engagement or open arts experience as such. So really finding a way for the community, and the community in this case were employees, to connect directly with the artist and to understand why there was art in their workplace, and what the art meant, and how it was selected, and what the actual sort of singular story or singular voice, singular message of that artist meant to them. So in the program, we had eventually about 1,200 artworks to choose from. Really amazing selection of unique stories, people with different cultural backgrounds, different personal identities, different places from all over the world. So artwork commissioned for the office in Tokyo, artwork commissioned in Stockholm, in Madrid, in Hong Kong, all over the United States of America. So it was a very rich sort of portfolio of artworks. But that was just the beginning, really. That was just the material with which to communicate with the employees.
Yeah, and I think that's what I got really interested when we spoke recently, Josephine, was, really you've gone from that journey of, art for art's sake, art for audience, and now you're into this world of, corporate world. Okay, how do we bring this idea of artistic practice into organizations? Because you get these horrible phrases around, well, what's the return on investment for art, right? Okay, which I'm sure is a bit of a contradiction in terms, but I suppose from your perspective, we'll go into a little bit more depth into some of those programs that you ran, but in your own belief system, you've been involved in this for a while. How do you believe the arts improves our self-awareness and even things like our ability to improve our well-being? Because to me, that's right at the core of, the impact of arts in working life. So, you have a huge amount of experience in this now. So, what's I'm not going to say bottom line, but ultimately, how does it help us?
It's a great question. And I think actually that's the question that has really kind of, I can go back to the beginning when I decided to sort of step out of the corporate life and move very much into the art world. It was already something that was burning within me. So to start with, making things, and I have a few quotes here, making things that are beyond just functional, really, have existed since the earliest of civilizations. So, and I've heard recently contemporary artists talking about this. Art making is not a thing apart from life or apart from living. Cave paintings recorded, not only the daily lives of those, and I'm talking about the cave paintings in France that go back, 30,000 years. we know that those caves not only contained cave paintings, but they were trading posts for objects that we can identify were not functional. So people made things and swapped them and shared them and traded them because they were beautiful, because they had an aesthetic quality, because there was an energy in the making of that object that came from the maker that they could exchange back. You can talk about the oral histories that have stretched back, storytelling, poetry, millennia of these. The ancient Greek and Roman civilization. I've personally just visited Pompeii for the first time.
Yeah, incredible experience.
It's an incredible experience. Yeah. If you haven't done so, folks, it's stunning to see the time and space and grace allocated for art in the homes of people in Pompeii. And to see that art actually is still really relevant. We think we've gone eons ahead of our forebears, but actually that art is still very relevant and poignant and moving. So basically art has been around for a very long time, and anything that's been around for a very long time, we have to pause and think that there's a reason that has persisted when other things have been brushed aside. Been huge developments since the Industrial Revolution, the technology revolution, the many revolutions and evolutions that have happened, and art still persists. It's still a super important part of most people's personal lives. So why is it not part of a work life or thought of in an elevated way inside work? The experience of art kind of grounds us in the present moment, whether we're looking or listening or doing something. When you're in the presence of art, that's where you are. While we're in work mode, I heard an interesting analogy and I can't attribute it. When we're in work mode, the body is often really a taxi for the brain. It's a taxi to get you from one thought to the other. It's a taxi to get you from one meeting to the other, one place to the other. Art involves all 5 senses, enabling a kind of embodied cognition, which is really important because we really do make sense of our environment through all our senses, not through just our knowledge or not through just information. I heard an interesting thing that information is agnostic, but meaning isn't. So meaning is how the body synthesizes the information you're given. So if you can activate all your senses, not all the time, it's exhausting, but if you can activate them, you bring a better kind of rounded meaning to every experience. I want to draw attention to the educator, Sir Kenneth Robinson, who lobbied throughout his whole life for the inclusion of creativity in the school curriculum specifically. He believed it was necessary for human development. Creativity isn't an activity as much as it is a state of mind, was his argument, that enables an individual to have agency over outcomes through a set of changing circumstances. So to be able to feel empowered, whatever the situation is something that creativity can help you with. And I think, those of us who have worked, particularly in the current corporate environment where the pace and pressure is pretty profound, that idea of having agency, whatever the circumstances, is already really an empowering idea. Artists kind of model these behaviors in their day-to-day work. Their work is based on continuous experimentation, creating and often kind of actively destroying their own work. They have no gods in the studio. If it isn't working, I have seen them score it out, cut it up, tear it to pieces and start over. But there's always something embedded in that failure that they take forward. So the idea of process is really important to the artist. So it's
I think that there's something really interesting, Josephine, in that it's something, just a couple of things on some of your commentary is really, really interesting. I actually write short stories as a means to help me to make decisions, nothing to do with what I'm writing about, but it just helps me make sense of the world. So I love that idea of, making sense and meaning, And I think the second thing that's really powerful for me, and I've seen this, I have friends who are artists as well, it's that comfort with destroying maybe a month's work.
Absolutely.
Right? And if you think about the corporate world, we'll often hold on to projects or we'll hold on to something because we've invested in it. Our gut tells us it's wrong. Our head tells us it's wrong. But we continue to try to make this thing work because we don't have that necessary artistic, belief in destruction.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's something really powerful in some of those things that, to me, aren't necessarily widely held within the corporate world. So I totally resonate with a couple of those things you're speaking about there.
I think it's very true, and I think the idea of this idea of like letting something fail, nothing ever quite fails. It falls apart, but you can always rescue something, and you'll certainly rescue the experience. And the experience could simply be. And I'll go back to artists who really are accustomed to putting themselves out there, to exhibitions, to performances. Yeah. And so they're accustomed to taking their work to a broader audience and hearing the feedback. So the idea of, failure or letting go or falling apart, the idea of bringing your work to your colleagues and allowing it in a really generous way to be seen and heard, and to take that feedback as, this sort of feedback is a gift thing, but understanding that feedback is giving you back something to your process that you can use again. Here again, artists that's the world they live in. Yeah. They make, they publish, they listen, they process, they synthesize, they move on. So I think artists model behaviors that are really useful for us as humans. And then if you want to bring that to the workplace, obviously it's very useful in the workplace. Yeah. And then there's just the little bit of science. Engaging with the arts in general it affects our physiology. It affects our heart rate, our breathing. It increases important chemicals, endorphins and oxytocin. Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, it goes under the short name of GOSH, has an established arts program for a long time, and they collect a lot of data. I won't share it all here, but essentially triaging children in an environment where there is art and artistic activity is far easier on both the child and the medic responsible. Moves faster, there's lower tension in the room, the child is less anxious. Similarly, postpartum women recover quicker in hospitals with art available to them. And there's a higher rate of retention for employees in medical institutions where there's art involved. Something really interesting in this area is a new book by Julia Holtz, which I'd like to recommend, called The Connection Cure. In it, she's sharing a lot of details about a new movement. It's published just in the last year, called social prescribing. And here's a situation where medical institutions and healthcare systems in Canada, the US, the UK, and parts of Europe are actually prescribing social activities, cultural activities, and outdoor activities to people with chronic illnesses. So it's being pulled into the medical system in a really formal way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've done a lot of work on the workplace well-being area, and one of the 8 areas that we've really honed in on is the whole idea of social wellness. So, it's a really, really powerful, way to think about impact, right?
Very powerful.
Yeah. Whereas sometimes people wouldn't necessarily make that connection, and I think it's becoming, I think it's really, really interesting to me, when you look particularly at different cultures around the world, their focus on things that, particularly in our part of the world, we would have seen a little bit as, it's a bit of a fad or whatever, So for example, the Japanese forest walking concept, right? Where, improves, a lot of studies done showing how it improves mental well-being, it improves your ability to deal with, more serious diseases, So I'm really, really fascinated in that area, and something we're involved in ourselves at that moment. I do want to ask you, just around your, so we know now that this is valuable, or let's just call it valuable for the moment. You've been in the trenches on this stuff. You come into a commercial organization, very scale focused, growth focused, but also very focused on different ways of doing things. And I suppose, from your own personal perspective, when we talk about this whole world of art and making a difference within the corporate world, what are you most proud of what you've done, and what are the areas that you have a bit of that didn't quite work, or maybe I overstretched myself on some of my thinking. Maybe I didn't bring some of those people along. So what have you, you know what I mean? Like, you've done a lot of really interesting, but what within that world is that was an amazing thing that we did together, you know? What are those?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think firstly, I was in a very lucky position. I was in a large company that had a very progressive and open attitude to what could be, and also a company that really valued innovation. So I think most companies would like to see themselves in a space where they value innovation. So it wasn't surprising to find it where I was at Open Arts. Some of the things that I'm most proud of, I suppose, was, and it has the double edge, where did I go wrong and how did I fix it thing, was formally embedding art practices in the workplace. So that is like, just to be basic and just so people can visualize it, that is painting, pottery, photography, and needlework. So I managed to get a situation where employees could participate for up to 60 to 90 minutes in these activities. And we had some bumps on the road, which is that people liked doing it. I knew it was good for them, but they felt like they couldn't officially take the time away. So I partnered with the company learning management system, which was called Cornerstone, which is used by many companies. And I set clearly defined learning outcomes that aligned with company priorities. And these were things that also aligned with my own philosophy and aligned with art making and the artist mindset. Things like resiliency, empathy, and innovation. They were the three sort of North Stars for the program. So this enabled me to set the classes up with a clear learning outcome, employees to engage with it, and we required managers to sign off if an entire team were participating. So suddenly you had manager support for an activity that had benefits for the company and for the individual employee. So it was a big win to kind of hop on that platform, ticking all the necessary boxes and see, that it had a positive effect on employees feeling enabled to participate. So we moved into the sort of team building space through art-based experiences. And then just leading on to the second sort of real moment of success. And I think this is a piece of learning for the art world, for those of you out there from the art world. And it was about metrics and data. So measuring the immediate impact of arts-based experiences at work. So we were able to show quite quickly that 60 minutes away from the desk engaging in an art-based experience changed employees' mood and mindsets significantly. So we did a quick audit on how people came to us, and we found out, just broadly speaking, that about a third were in good form. They were having a good day. They were great. About a third were meh. Whatever, it's just another Wednesday. And about a third were ready to walk out the door. Now, this wasn't a chronic situation. It was an acute situation. They'd had a bad morning, they'd had a bad review, they were struggling with a task that seemed just impossible to deal with. And we know that consistently they left the room after just 60 minutes of walking to the room next door. We didn't bus them anywhere. We didn't interfere with them and interfere with their daily schedule unduly. They went back to their desks, and 97 to 98% of them were in that top, I feel great, I'm having a great day. We also saw that we carefully managed the data about who was using the space, and we could see that everybody in the organization almost equally, so the engineering teams, the business-facing teams, and the hardest to catch, the sales and marketing teams, who are often engaged with the outside world, were using it roughly equally, in different ways, but equally. And then we were able to show or see that we were creating new networks inside of the company. So people can become quite siloed in a large organization, very specialized. Specialization is the curse of the 21st century. And so they found they were working with 2 or 3 people, maybe 10 people on a regular basis, but through the art room, their network, specifically in the engineering cohort, grew hugely. And so we were building soft ties, so situations where people had ease with each other that they wouldn't have had otherwise, contact with each other, context about each other, and that helped them at work to go to each other in a safe space and ask for help ask for, participation in a new team, ask for idea feedback. So it was very, very, very rewarding in a pure and straightforward business sense. And obviously, we were able to, state of mind and well-being at work. And I just have one thing to say about that, which is that you can't do one yoga session and be cured. So a lot of thinking and thoughts about art-based practice at work is like, let's bring in a mural artist, which is a fantastic thing to do. But one mural artist for one day with no embedded learning outcomes is just a day out. And then finally, the thing I was really happy with, and I'll touch on this a little bit later because I think it has real impact for business, and it was positioning artists as thought leaders in broad societal contexts with other professional speakers. So I would run an internal talk series. So we would have individual speakers, panel discussions, workshops, and residencies where an artist might work over a period of time with a team working on AI or privacy. And we worked with amazing artists, Camille Seaman, who's an activist and an environmentalist who has photographed the North and South, one of the poles, for decades and is extremely passionate and learned from first-hand observation about what's happening in the world. Yinka Ilori, Renee Cox, these are artists in the UK and America respectively who have really brought a different kind of language around their cultures, African American and British African artist. Amanda Pingbody Bakia, who is an Asian artist, who is a scientist, a data visualization artist, an activist. She's gay, she's American Asian. So we were able to bring all these incredible people, artists like Scott Eaton, Anna Ridler, Refik Anadol, whose research in AI and generative AI specifically is at the forefront of AI up to this point. So we were bringing them in and seating them shoulder to shoulder with technologists and engineers and policymakers. So we were bringing that voice, that very specific, singular, activist, radical voice to the table with a perspective on what the company was doing. And I think that was a great
it's really, really interesting. That idea of, artists as thought leaders is really, really interesting because I think, probably for most people, they will view that artist in a particular way, in a particular avenue, as opposed to thinking about, the art in a way is the outcome of the life, right? So, and how do you bring those things to bear? Because I love that idea as well of, ostensibly that one of the artists you mentioned, fantastic photographer and taking amazing pictures, but it's then the context around that and how that represents the broader sustainability challenge, for example, that we wouldn't necessarily make those connections with. So I love that idea. So I'd like to go into, to any of the leaders out there that are listening to this, right? And you're obviously extremely passionate about artistic practice, its value, and I use value in the broadest sense. I mean, you're speaking to a CEO, and they're kind of going, there's something kind of in this, right? Where did it start? So, you've started a few programs, you've gone big on a number of programs. So what would you say to that CEO? They're already at the point where they're kind of going, do you know what? There's something in this. I've heard enough, but I want to take that first step. What would you recommend? What does that look like?
Okay, I think it depends a little bit on the scale of the organization. I want to acknowledge that that experience was in a very large organization, and there are very small organizations who can take steps. I suppose to talking about starting, I think, enabling creativity at work, make it acceptable to take time. The idea of 15 or 30 minutes maker break should be acceptable. That was one of my first hurdles, even in the large organization, is like make it an acceptable part of the organization. You can add books to the company, however small the company is. You can add in books that bring the voice of creatives into the organization. You can have a book swapping shelf, so that employees can actually read something inspiring that's not totally work-related, but work-adjacent, and share it and have a conversation and build community. Creative tools, I mean, obviously I was in the privileged position of having an entire art room, but I spent most of the time trying to get those art materials back from teams who borrowed my various creative tools, because they wanted to bring some of that to a regular meeting or presentation. Yeah. So I was forever trying to get the paints. And
where's my paint box?
Exactly, yeah. So just making some of those things available means that people will actually use them when they want to communicate with each other or build a more dynamic meeting.
Yeah.
So, and just back to, I think, what you mentioned about your storytelling, and there's science behind it. If you are stuck in a problem and you just drop it momentarily and move on to something else, okay, you think it's kind of like taking a nap and coming back and the problem is solved. But actually the science says that's not what's actually happening. What's actually happening is that you take the heat off that part of your brain for a moment and you allow another part of a brain to take up a task, whatever that task is, playing the guitar, writing a song. But the light stays on in the problem-solving part of your mind. Yeah. And what happens is weaker associations start to bubble to the surface. So you remember you once solved a similar problem by doing X, Y, and Z, or talking to a particular person. So while you're playing the guitar for 15 or 20 minutes, the problem has not gone away, but it's gone to a different part of your brain where it's being dealt with differently. So something really important is happening in your brain while you think you're just playing the guitar or writing a story. Yeah. A little bit of science about it as well, about how we move from A idea to B idea. In order to do that, we have to leave A first. You can't go to B until you've actually checked out of the station at A. And to do that, you need to create a transit for yourself. You need to go into that zone where you drop everything that was associated to A being the only answer and make space for B to start to percolate. And our small times out can help in doing that. And art is a wonderful environment for that to happen in. We talk about enriching the space. Enriching the space is really important. I'm very interested in an idea called ambient belonging, which is a series of cues that we pick up all the time from the spaces we're in that tell us whether we belong or not. Is the space designed, like if I were to work in a 1960 mechanics shop, they would have those calendars on the wall, and I would feel immediately that this space probably wasn't a welcoming space for me. Obviously, we've moved on along from there, but I think we have to be a bit more intentional about it. And if we want to say this is a space that art is important, we need to add things in. Obviously, you can buy paintings and put artists in there. If you can't afford paintings, you can work with limited edition prints. You can commission an artist to make a singular vinyl piece. You can bring an artist in to listen to what the main concerns of your company are, what their lofty, higher consciousness thoughts are, and they can design something specifically for your company. Personally, my school had a giant bad reproduction of Picasso's Guernica, and I think that changed my life. I think for a long time I knew that painting was telling me something important. I didn't understand what it was, but over time the noise of that print became very, very clear that the world was a chaotic place and one that we were part of, and that we had to take a certain set of measures to engage with in a kind of conscious way. So I think you can enrich the space, you can make time for creative activity, and you can make it valuable. You can create dedicated spaces for individuals or group, a small music room where you can have a number of instruments, or people can bring in their instruments so they can have a place to go. You can set up knitting and crochet is a completely valid. Some of the great sports people and many of the supermodels and actors in the world use this as a break time. You can create a space where that is a doable task, however big or small your organization.
I have to say, just one of the MDs in our business is one of the most incredible sewers, crocheters, and everything else in between. And during meetings, sometimes when you're on a call with her, she's making some fabulous dress, whilst also engaging with you on topics not related to art. So, I definitely think we've a strong potential in on the stitching side.
I love it. And then just two more things. I think consider cultural experience for team or company events. Theatre, music, comedy, improv, museums and galleries. You can engage guided tours for your team or your organisation at relatively modest costs. Classic go-to team events are often skewed towards particular genders. I'm thinking of axe throwing, four-wheel drive, and escape room activities. They're all good fun, but
when did axe throwing become a thing? I was always fascinated. Like, where did that come from? But anyway,
I wouldn't mind an invite actually, just to figure out what the thing is. But just consider other things, and then I think with more diverse corporate cultures, things like you want to be mindful of things like cocktail mixing, cocktail drinking, whiskey tasting, etc. Because part of your organisation, just for religious or cultural reasons, might not be able to take part in it. And then finally, leverage the creative potential of like calendar moments. It might be awkward to bring a guitarist or a poet in, of an average Tuesday, but think about International Women's Day. Is there an opportunity on International Women's Day to focus on a creative person in that space? Earth Day, International Mental Health Week, obviously loads of potential for, really legitimately planning a cultural or creative activity around that space. National Poetry Day, there you go, bring a poet in, have a poetry listening, poetry reading moment. And even people who are unsure or uncomfortable, they're sure in the space of poetry, it's been a transformative experience in my direct experience, bringing them to that kind of thing. So, like I said, we brought Camille Seaman in, who's a wonderful artist, but our own Dorothy Cross is an amazingly sensitive activist in the environmental zone, and she speaks so engaging.
So listen, Josephine, thank you very much. Massively interesting, and I have to say massively exciting, very much aligned with my thinking. So very much appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. It was great fun.
Thank you. And that's the end of the show today. I'd really like to thank Josephine for the interview today. I'm very excited about the potential future application of artistic thinking in organizations in order to improve well-being, innovation, and everything else in between. I would ask you all to subscribe to our show, Future Work World, and it's available on all of the popular platforms like YouTube, Spotify, and LinkedIn, and more. Thank you very much indeed. Away from me. Bye.